Former Florida gubernatorial candidate Andrew Gillum sees just a little bit of hope following his stunning fall from grace after a federal jury found him not guilty of lying to the FBI. He was accused of conspiring with his mentor to divert campaign funds for personal use. Despite the acquittal on the charges about lying, Gillum's legal troubles are far from over. See, the jury deadlocked on 18 other charges, and prosecutors say that they plan to retry Gillum on those outstanding charges. He spoke outside the courthouse shortly after his acquittal.
I think about what it has felt like to, in my opinion, to be hunted for seven years. Mm-hmm. To have people who you've known forever doubt you. To read things about you that don't resemble, not only don't resemble the truth, but don't resemble who you are.
Gillum narrowly lost the governorship back in 2018 to the current Florida governor, Ron DeSantis. Here to help break all of this down with me is veteran former prosecutor and legal analyst, Paul Henderson. Paul, this case is somewhat slipping under the radar, I would say, relative to how big of a star Andrew was at one time. Yeah, his legal team has been successful in getting that acquittal on the one charge. How concerned do you think Andrew and his mentor should be around prosecutors bringing these charges again on the 18 charges that were deadlocked?
I think he should be pretty concerned. I mean, I know they're still accepting money and the GoFundMe and the plea for people to contribute and try and help and support him. And actually, because of how the government has articulated that they're going to move forward, it's still pretty risky for him. So what they've said is, even though the 18 other charges that they were hung and are suspended, the government has an opportunity to retry them. Now, typically, when you retry a case, you have to evaluate, like, well, how did it hang? And this was a 2-10 split, meaning that only 2 of the jurors thought that they should be found guilty. But what they've done, or what they've decided to do, is to move forward with just 2 of the 18 charges that remain, and that's just the conspiracy charge and the wire fraud charge. And that actually makes their case stronger because they can focus in and center on the actual acts that may be separated from the personality of Gillum. And that makes it a stronger case for them. That's why I think he should still be concerned.
Yeah, so as you say, Paul, just having the 2 charges versus the 18 now, a more narrowly tailored prosecution for sure. They'll have more time to focus on those and their witnesses. But here's the thing, Paul, you were a prosecutor for some time. When you retry a case that had previously deadlocked or had a hung jury, what do you do differently? Other than in this case we've discussed, they're going to drop many of the charges. But in terms of the evidence, the witnesses, the coaching, the prep, how do you prepare differently?
Well, you prepare very differently, and here's why: because you've seen the defense's case. You know what they're going to present. You know what they're going to argue. They didn't pull any punches when they were fighting the original 19 charges at the first trial. So in this case, you know what they're going to present. You're going to streamline your case and make sure that you focus on the very specific issues that you thought that were the strongest parts of your case. The bigger issue, though, is what that process looks like from a prosecutorial perspective and making the determination to move forward in a case. And typically, with a split that's as bad as a 2-10 leaning towards innocent, you're not likely to bring that case to the forefront unless there are real repercussions, like a murder case that you actually believe in, or something that you really have an agenda on. And that, to me, is what's telling, and what I'm seeing behind the headlines of this case is why the DOJ is so focused in this case to move forward on a case that they just lost and they could have walked away from. I mean, DOJ has a lot of targets right now. I don't know why they're not looking at somebody like Clarence Thomas. But let's go back to Gillum and see like how they're trying to focus on him and what they're doing to try and hold him accountable. I think it's a strong case that they have, especially with the wire fraud. That is really transactional, and it's really hard to defeat a case like that if they move forward in federal court. And I think they had an indication that they would have to do something. After 3 days of deliberation, and this went 5 full days with 19 counts, it wasn't looking good for the government's case. So I think they're going to prepare this case and present this case very differently as we see it when it gets retried in federal courts.
Okay, Paul, that's an extremely thorough legal analysis. For that, we thank you. I want to talk about the cultural aspect of this case, right? We know Gillum's wife, RJ, as you mentioned, she's already gone on social media, Instagram and the like, to ask for donations to help pay for his legal defense. Again, I started with this talking about how it's kind of gone under the radar. Andrew Gillum was, along with his beautiful black family, many were saying back in 2018 he could be the next president. I mean, that was a conversation. I'm old enough to remember it. And yet here we are. I got to ask the tough question, Paul. How much of the culture's disengagement with Andrew Gillum and lack of interest, it seems, from the culture at large, maybe is rooted in some homophobia? The fact that at the beginning of this, when all of this scandal came to light, it was revealed that Gillum is bisexual and he and his wife have, understanding around that aspect of his identity. How much of this is some of the culture's homophobia coming out?
I think a lot of it, and it's a push-pull because that absolutely raised his profile. I know I certainly paid attention to that entire story, and when I saw all of the information coming from him and his wife about the GoFundMe and about his case and about how he was being prosecuted and persecuted in this case, I think that did have an influence on the audience, specifically of communities of color, that had an evolved empathy for who he was and how much he has been through over these past few years.
Thank you, Paul Henderson. You make brilliant legal points. I expect much of what you said around the prosecution to pan out exactly as so. And we do have to wait and see on the culture's reception to what a resurrection of the political career, potentially, of Andrew Gillum looks like. Certainly, we have forgiven folks with much more egregious histories. I'm looking at you, the city of D.C. Paul Henderson, thank you so much for joining me. Author Baratunde Thurston sits down to see if he can answer the blackest questions. We'll have part of that interview. It's up next. You're watching theGrio.